Hi everybody, welcome to GlobalCon 4 and thanks for watching my session, Governance for Teams A to Z. My name is Jesper Oosterveld and as you can see I'm working from home. It is also kind of work, I'm recording from home of course. I have some small children now, so I have my fingers crossed they will stay quiet for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So wish me luck. So a little bit about me. So as I said, my name is Jasper. I work and live in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, for a company called InSpark as a modern workplace consultant. And I basically support customers implementing modern workplace with a focus on governance, compliance, and Microsoft Teams. And I've also been an MVP for the last 7 years. So let's get started. So how do you set up a successful governance strategy for Microsoft Teams? Well, we do this in 3 steps. The first step is a governance workshop. The second one is defining your strategy, your governance strategy. And the last one, of course, is implementing the strategy. So let's go over this. But before I do that, I do these same sort of sessions slash workshops with my customers, and I always take a little bit of a step back. So I would like to do that with you as well. So I find it important to take a step back and just mention what Microsoft Teams is, what it can do, and what the value is for companies and organizations. So it consists out of a couple of pillars. The first one is chat. So by using chat, you can definitely improve and stimulate a more open and informal culture. Back home in the Netherlands, we're very informal anyway, so that's not necessarily a main goal for organizations. But for them, with chat, you can definitely reduce email because for some stuff you would send an email for, you can also use chat. And we've seen, especially within InSpark, definitely a decrease in the usage of internal emails because we're mostly using Teams with chat, of course. The main email conversations I still have is mainly with customers who are not necessarily part of teams we collaborate in. The second one is meetings. So you can have a lot more effective and efficient meetings by using Microsoft Teams. You can share your screen. You can use a whiteboard application. You can give somebody access to your desktop. So again, it's a lot more efficient and easier as well. And these days, Teams also bundles all the related information of a meeting together. So it's the documents, the notes, potential recordings. So it's definitely a fantastic development. The third one is calling, and that's one we want to really touch upon today. That's basically like the call center functionality. So that's a whole topic by itself, but it is part of Microsoft Teams, so that it is important to mention that at least. And I think this is the main core of Teams. This is the main selling point, of course, is the collaboration part. So this is collaborating with people, right? So this can be your colleagues, but it can also be customers, for example. And what I like about that is just how efficient it is and how easy it is. All your files are stored in the team, related to your department, to your project. You can chat with your customers, and everything's in one place. And it's just like it's just such a step forward the way we're used to collaborate with each other. And the last one is automate. And this is basically automating and integrating business processes within Microsoft Teams. So for example, we use this to measure people's moods, especially during these hard Corona times. And then once a week, a chatbot asks us, okay, how are you feeling? You use a smiley, and this data is basically stored. It's anonymous, but it's stored, and it gives the management team some insights in how each department is doing. So then if they see that the mood is very low in a certain part of the company, they can spend some time and effort in increasing that, of course. It's just a small example. You can also think about integrating declaration forms or, you name it. You can basically do it. And that's definitely one that I recommend really diving into. There must be multiple sessions about this during this conference. So after that, normally I show a demo of Microsoft Teams, but I'll save you that because it's a very basic demo. I can use chat, I can invite guests, what channels are for, the basics, so customers get a good understanding what it is and what it can do. And I basically summarize it with this slide. So I tell them Hopefully you notice that with Teams, you really have a central integrated work experience. You don't have to switch that much between applications. In Teams, I can check my agenda. I have Yammer integration. There will be a SharePoint integration to display your internet homepage. I can almost do almost everything within Teams, apart from apart from sending and receiving emails. Or maybe in the future they'll be there as well. It wouldn't surprise me actually. It would be kind of cool to have a tile that basically shows your webmail. That would be fantastic. And by using this central and integrated work experience, that's what I mentioned, I switch less between applications. So you do notice that you're concentrating a bit more, and it really helps your productivity. So I really believe that by using Teams, by using it properly, you can definitely increase your productivity. There's still a lot of customers out there who were in the process of going through a digital transformation, or they had the ambitions. And by using Teams, you basically are doing this because Teams is a cloud-only application. And we've seen such an increase due to the Corona crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, in people using and adopting Teams. And by that, they're already going through a digital transformation that, with all its benefits, and of course, there's also challenges, but I think it has more benefits and challenges. So that's definitely definitely a value of Teams. And the last one, of course, is that on one hand, you're compliant, if your data is compliant and secure in the data centers of Microsoft, but you do have your own responsibility, right? You cannot, let's say you have a laptop that has sensitive data on it that's stored in Teams, and maybe you synchronize it offline, and the laptop gets stolen or lost. You cannot go to Microsoft and say, hey, my data is gone. What are you going to do? They're like, well, sorry to hear that, but it's your responsibility. The data's in your device. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that, but Microsoft offers enough services and tools to help you with that part. But please be aware that it's your responsibility. It's not Microsoft's responsibility. So then I've talked about Teams, the pillars. I did a demo, and then I basically did a summary with the business value. And then I asked them, what are your worries when you see this? And I noticed that they're basically, after doing this for like a year and a half, it's the same ones. They're worried about an explosion of teams, a duplication of teams, and that's a very valid one because if you're able to create teams just by yourself, and you create a marketing team, and your colleague is doing it as well, there's nothing in Teams saying like, hey, Peter already created a team called marketing. Do you sure you want to do it? No, it doesn't do that. So it's a valid concern. Especially if the naming is weird and it's just kind of, people don't really know what the purpose is. And it's also for IT because it makes them harder to manage for them. Finding stuff in Teams is still not great. There are improvements coming, but finding a team can be a bit of a painful experience. Complexity, to pronounce it correctly, complexity. And this more resolves around the creation process of a team. And I can kind of see that because you do get a lot of questions asked, and the term Microsoft 365 groups is thrown in there, and just not everybody knows what it is. So it can be definitely complex for the non-tech savvy end users. And of course, that's what I said before, if you don't do anything around compliance and security, there's a huge risk around the data leak. And that's often by accident. Of course, there are cases, a situation where people steal data or leak it on purpose, but most of the times that's not the case. So that's definitely also really valid to worry. And again, this is, it's not rocket science, but if you don't address this, it will definitely result in failed user adoption because people will get frustrated, especially with the duplication of teams and not be able to find anything. They're just not going to use it anymore. And this would be a huge shame because if you roll out teams with a good governance strategy and with a good adoption approach, it can be so beneficial for you as an organization. And of course, also on the other side is IT. It'll become impossible for them to manage. It's just, they don't know if teams are being used, what the purpose is, and why there are 5 teams called marketing. These are definitely 2 very good reasons to implement a governance strategy. Well, that's not it. There's more stuff that's important. And that's, of course, you need to connect IT and business. So when you define your governance strategy through a workshop, you have to bring these 2 audiences together, audiences, so to speak, right? Because they need to be aware of each other's responsibilities and each other's requirements to kind of take away potential frustration aspects and communication mistakes down the line. Adoption is, again, I said, like governance is crucial for a good long-term rollout and usage of Teams, but so is adoption. And these two go hand in hand. Because in your governance strategy, you define aspects that need to be picked up within your adoption strategy. For example, maybe in your governance strategy, you define external access. Well, within Teams, an owner is responsible for inviting external people. That means that this needs to be communicated. Like, hey, do you have the role as owner? And these are your responsibilities. And one of these is working with external people. And that's how it works. Maybe you need to set up some training sessions, and that's part of it. So within your adoption, within your governance strategy, you make decisions that impact your adoption rollout strategy as well. And the third one is you probably have as an organizational internal procedures, and you need to comply to certain law and regulation, right? Depending on the country you're in, or are you European Union or not, or maybe you work for a medical company. If you just roll out Teams, you're not going to be able to comply with that at all, because by default Teams is not going to tell you, hey, you're now uploading a document with a social security number or IBAN number. You shouldn't do that. Or like, hey, you're now trying to add an app from some sort of random external service. That stuff is all on by default most of the times. So again, you need to check what are my internal procedures and what are some law and regulations I need to comply with, and how does that match the rollout and the usage of Teams and some of the settings of Teams. And the last one, of course, is Microsoft 365 groups. If you create a team, you just not only create a team, there's a SharePoint team site involved, you get a hidden inbox, you get a hidden calendar, you have planner with tasks, you have stream still, Power BI can be connected. So there's a lot happening. So on one side, you need to make sure your business users understand this, and that also IT understands what the impact is and how they can manage it. So then you go into the workshop, and we basically go over a lot of topics. It is doable to set up a good governance strategy, but it takes time, right? You will see the list is pretty long, but you have to do it, right? I'm not going to go into depth about all of these topics because I just don't have the time. So if you have any questions after you watch this recording, just let me know, and I can help you out. But the scope, that's basically aimed around the scope of the governance strategy. So are you just defining your strategy around collaboration, or maybe also the calling aspect as well, the one I discussed? What are the vision and goals of you as organization about using Teams, right? So that's something you also probably can use or reuse from your adoption strategy. But this definitely helps explaining it to your colleagues. Like, this is why we're doing it, and these are the benefits. Well, once you define your strategy, you need to have a group of people who make sure the strategy is applied, right? And the strategy is updated. And they need to take a look at external factors, like, for example, the COVID-19 crisis, or maybe there's some new law and regulations. And how is all of that, and business requests as well, right? How are all these things going to impact your usage of Teams? So that's what we call a steering committee. You can also call it the governance board, but we just use steering committee. But it's very crucial you set it up as well. Roles and responsibilities. So this is on one hand like the Office 365 administrators, so that you know who to go to if there's certain issues. People know what responsibilities they have. But also some departments, right? What departments are related to the rollout of Teams? Who's going to be involved around new features and updates, stuff like that. You need to write it down to make sure everybody understands what is his or her role, what are the responsibilities, to definitely prevent miscommunication down the line. This is the one we'll dive into the most today. Processes and procedures. And then I'm talking about the employment process. So when somebody joins the company, how can you make sure he or she gets a license, gets access to a team? What happens if somebody goes to a different department? What happens when somebody leaves the company? And all of that related to Teams, you need to address that. And the last one is new features and updates. So how are you going to anticipate those changes? And there are multiple ways of doing that. You have targeted release. But these days, it's actually very fun. I discovered that a couple days before doing this recording, there is now a new feature to use apply public previews from just Teams. Microsoft Teams, because Microsoft Teams is not part of targeted release, only SharePoint and OneDrive, and I believe Exchange as well. So that's definitely something to look into as well. But you need to anticipate this, because especially Office 365, the changes go very rapidly, and also for Microsoft Teams. So this is the one we'll dive into deep. So these are I'm going to go through quickly, because these are the ones we'll discuss today. So first we start with collaboration templates. How are you as an organization going to use Teams? Are you going to use it to collaborate? It's collaboration, of course. But are you collaborating just with departments, or is it around projects, cross departments, customers, maybe more? We have expert teams, for example, within Inspark. So the first thing you need to do is define that. Define what kind of collaboration templates you would like to use with Teams. So once you've done this, and I do advise to keep it simple and small, don't immediately define 10, because then you can make it very difficult for yourself. Maybe start with 2 or 3, and then once you've done that successfully, add other ones. Once you've done that, then per collaboration template, you need to discuss a couple other topics, and that's the ones I'm going to discuss now. So the first one is naming convention. And here I just added an example. So that's one we often see. So what we often see is that customers, they apply a project collaboration template, and then in Teams, it always says PROJ dash the name of the team. And that's something that's possible. And then of course you can also do it with the SharePoint URL. I set it between brackets. If you want that, you really have to use something as a provisioning solution to make sure you're able to do that. Couple options. You can use the issue ID as a policy, where you can add a prefix and a word or a suffix combined with an AID property. So for example, you can say every time when somebody creates a team, his or her department is added in the team name. And I can do that before the team name or after. I've never seen it being applied in the real world, at least with our customers. I don't think many people have used this. You can also connect it to a provisioning solution, more about that later. And again, if you go more for a self-service scenario where people are just able to create teams by themselves, you can leave it up to them. And you don't have to do it. It's not obligated. It has its advantages. And there are definitely scenarios, and I'll discuss one where this is definitely useful, but it's not always the case. For now, it definitely improves the findability, because trying to find a team is a bit of a pain. So it can definitely help to make that easier. Challenges, especially if you want to use an AID policy, your AID needs to be up to date, and that's not always the case. What I said, you have to use a word and a prefix or a suffix. But if, let's say, you want to use 4 templates, collaboration templates, you can't really find one word that describes what one is, right? So that just doesn't work. If you go for the self-service scenario, people just forget, not to annoy you, but they will just, in the heat of the moment, you're creating a team, you don't always remember, right? So I advise to only use it when it's really necessary. So for example, we had a local district. I can never pronounce the first word, that's why I had a district. So they shared their tenant with multiple other districts and some companies. So for them, it was very necessary to implement a naming convention. So for IT, it was very clear, and also for the people, of course, where this team belonged to. So that for me, that was a really good use case / business case to really use naming conventions. External access, so being able to invite guests into your teams. So you can allow it for all teams, a selection, or disable it, something I don't advise. And these days you can also decide it with a sensitivity label. More about that later. Some advantages. It will definitely reduce shadow IT, because even more than ever, people work with other people outside the company. It's just I have that. All the customers I work with have that. It's just the standard, the norm these days. If you don't provide this, they'll find another way. They open a Dropbox account, they'll keep using email, whatever. It's a lot more efficient, right? If you, again, the emailing of documents like to customers, it's just like, it doesn't really work, right? It's so much easier to invite people in a team and then work together on a document, for example, or presentation, whatever. There are some challenges. Compliance is crucial, man. Because of course you need to invite a guest into your team, so they need to have access. But after that, they can do whatever they want. They can download all the files. Nothing is preventing that if you don't implement, for example, data classification or DLP. It's a responsibility for the owners because they're the only ones who are able to invite guests, and that's it's fine. But that's what I mentioned in the beginning. That's why adoption is so important as well, so that the owners are aware of their responsibility. So I advise to turn it on for all teams, and then of course I always get some frowny faces, like wow for everything. Yeah, if it's possible, it is of course the situations where it's not possible. But if it is, definitely go for that. And if you do that, it's very important you put some monitoring in place. So one of these options is Azure Access Reviews. You do unfortunately need an Azure ADP2 license, but you can create a review process where periodically, I believe it can be, it's like a month, a quarter, or 6 months or something in a year. The owners get an email and it says, hey, your review is starting, and they can review all the members of a team or just the guests. There are some extensions possible, and of course you always also have the Microsoft Graph, so you can also build your own solution. Social control, that's definitely one that's overlooked because let's say you have a department and you see like people being added or people posting and it says guests between. It's like, why are they guests in our team? So you can have, you can be like to your owner, like, hey, I don't think we're supposed to have external people in here, right? So social control definitely helps. Educate your team owners, of course. And you have to start with compliance, And like I always tell our customers as well, I understand you don't have it in place now, but please get the ball rolling, And I really see a huge increase in this as well. So that's definitely good to see. We'll touch upon this a little bit later. Next one is expiration policies. So this means that periodically you can review teams that haven't been used for a while. And then, basically the owners can decide if they want to keep or remove the team. You can apply this to all teams, selection or none. And these days you have a nice activity check because it's weird that owners of a team that's actively being used, maybe for a department, get an email that asks them, hey, do you want to renew this team? It's like, yeah, of course, because we use this on a daily basis. If the system notices that, it will get renewed automatically. So let's say you have an expiration policy for 6 months. If it sees that that's being used, it will just renew it automatically. We'll keep doing that all the time. Now, it definitely keeps your environment clean. If you don't want to have any inactive teams, and again, it's fine, but I can understand it's nice to clean stuff up if it's not being used. So that does it for you automatically, and and IT doesn't have to do it manually; it's just done automatically. So it also reduces. So they have some time left, basically. If an owner decides to remove a team, gone is gone, right? a team that's being removed will be in a recycle bin for 30 days with everything, the chat, the planner, the videos, the documents. And after those 30 days, it will be automatically removed if you don't have any additional backup in place. It's a responsibility for the owners because they are the ones who will get an email asking them, hey, do you want to keep or remove this team? So they need to be aware, if you implement this, that is happening, so that they're not surprised when they get that email. Or these days, you also see a little notification in the team. That makes it a bit easier, though. But they need to be aware of it. Again, if teams can be deleted that maybe contain content or chat that maybe for certain regulations need to be kept for longer than the team is when the team is being deleted. So that's why you really need to think about retention. Is there content like documents or chat that needs to be preserved for a certain amount of time? Because if you don't do that, the team will just be gone, and it can cause an issue, of course, for the organization. So more about that later. All the compliance stuff I'll discuss, don't worry, but it's just a little bit near the end. I'd advise just turn it on for a year to start with, see how it goes, see if it works, and then you can always extend it or bring it back, of course. And you have to work on retention. Well, these are the default options around backup and restore. Teams have a 30-day recycle bin. Challenges. Channels have their own 30 days recycle bin. Content is 93 days because it's the SharePoint part. And videos stored in Stream are also 30 days. But be aware, Microsoft is moving the storage locations of recordings for Teams to SharePoint and OneDrive. So then those 30 days will be replaced by 93 days. You have to review this, review it, is this fine for us, or do we need to have a longer backup and restore options. Then you need to look at third-party vendors. I added AvePoint because I've seen their solution. It's very good. There are more others who do that as well. So just browse the market a little bit. But then you have to be aware of, you have to make sure that the default is not good enough for you. Then look into external solutions. And of course, apply your retention policies. And more about that later. Well, your teams can have a couple of privacy options. The first one is private, so that means that the owners are the only ones able to invite members. Public allows everybody to become a member, and the content is automatically findable for everybody within the company. Org-wide automatically adds all the employees, and I think there's a max of 5. And I've not seen this being used. It's sort of like a Yammer spin-off. And I understood that when it was introduced, because Yammer was, was just kind of in a standstill. But these days, with the whole new improved Yammer, I don't really see the use case for that anymore. But maybe there are situations in your business organization where this can be useful. I always go for open by default to really stimulate knowledge sharing and making sure you can find relevant content. But of course, there are teams like for the board or maybe sensitive projects where that's not possible. Of course, put in a private then. Be aware, the owners can always switch back. They can go from open to private and private to open. This is not the case if the privacy is set by a sensitivity label, because then it's just set. You cannot switch anymore. More about that later. Oh, here we go. Sorry, you don't have to wait anymore. So sensitivity labels have been around for a while, and traditionally they were used to classify content. So, for example, we have this presentation. I can classify it as highly sensitive, and by doing that, if the presentation is sent outside our company walls, virtual walls, maybe you who see this gets it. You cannot open it. You'll try to log in, but it'll just say like, no, it's not possible. These labels can now be extended to be used with Teams or SharePoint team sites. Basically Microsoft 365 groups. But the main use case will be Teams. You can set the privacy, right? It can be public or private. You can allow or block external access. And you can also, I believe they should start with this soon, is define your external sharing links. So maybe you want to allow guests, but you only want content to be shared. For example, maybe you want people to share content to only the existing guests, for example, or you just don't want it at all. So you can do this, but should be coming here this year, but fingers crossed. You can also manage unmanaged devices. So let's say I log into a customer's Teams environment with my own device. They can have a strict policy that's saying, okay, that's fine, but we don't want you to use the full Office application suite. We just want you to use the browser, for example. So this is something you need to discuss with the person who's responsible for the whole conditional access part and the whole Intune side of things. So you don't intervene with each other's policies, so to speak. The label you assign to a team does nothing with the content. So let's say you have a label called highly sensitive and you connect it to a team. All the documents you upload are not going to automatically have that label. So that's something to be aware of. I understand that has its pros and its cons, of course. This is what it looks like. So basically you have a label here and I say, hey, I want to use this label for groups and sites. So you don't have to use both. You can just use it for group and sites instead of for files and emails. These are the two options you have. So this is what I discussed, the privacy option, external user access. So this is what it will look like. So I select the label called project, and you can see I can only select private. I try to add an external person, and I'm not able to do that. I don't like this one because it's unclear. I would like to have a message saying like, hey, this is disabled because of a company policy or something, or the label that's being used. But now it's just kind of unclear why it doesn't work. This is just an example of the unmanaged devices. So here you can see that I'm not able to get access to the documents. I advise this to use this with self-service team creation. So allowing your users to use the Teams application client. You have to set this up in a separate project if you haven't done that, because this is quite this costs time to do this properly. That's just too much time to also combine it with your initial governance strategy for Teams. If they already have a data classification, then you can integrate it. But if they don't, set it up in a separate project. Next up is DLP, data loss prevention. And you can prevent sharing of sensitive information in chat. So the most common cases are security numbers or credit card numbers, IBAN numbers, right, from banking. This is done with sensitive information types. You can also create your own. So let's say you have a project called, oh man, Project Flight or something. Then you can define your information type called Project Flight, and it can recognize certain words. So let's say I have a word called MTX500 or something, and if that's being used in a document, this policy can be triggered, for example. You know that this is done for to prevent the sharing externally or internally of documents. But for chat, DLP and chat, you need an E5 license, so be aware of that. DLP works fine with content, so the SharePoint side, but not with the chat. Well, it does work, but you need a more expensive license. This is an example of a Word document in the browser that contains an IBAN number, and you see that that IBAN number is added and it automatically triggers the policy. Let's say you have a document and you upload it to SharePoint. It gives you a little red button. You can see that it's being blocked, and the policy tips gives you more information. And the text you see there, that this message or item is blocked, you can add that yourself. You can allow people to override it and or report it. And every time a DLP policy is triggered, it sends a message to somebody you assigned in a policy. So this can be, for example, the CISO, you know, that's responsible for the security within the company. Yeah. This is what it looks like with chat. So very similar. You know, I add a message with an IBAN number, it's triggered immediately, and I get the same policy tip. I advise to really look at the regulations you need to comply with and the other internal procedures, and then see, okay, we have these, how we're going to use this within teams. You need to do a lot of testing. DLP doesn't always work the way I expect it to work. It's definitely a lot better than it used to be, but still, you need to do a lot of testing to make sure it, you know, your policy works. And when you do this, you have to tell your users, like, hey, we're implementing DLP, and implementing DLP, and this is the reason we're doing it, and this is how it will impact you, and this is how you can deal with it. Because if you don't, they're going to be like, why am I getting all these messages, right? Again, same as data application, it's better to set it up in a separate project. Retention is really aimed at containing chat or content for an X amount of period, so that's days, months, or years. Retain and then delete is an option, and the last one is just delete. So these are the options you have. Retention for chat isn't supported in private channels. My advice for this is the same as for DLP. So that's not any difference. You just need to do a lot of testing, set it up in different projects, see what regulations you need to comply with, and how you can implement it within teams. Once you've done this, right? So you went over all your templates, the naming policies, external access, expiration policy. Once you've done all these things, then you can basically take a look, okay, how are we going to facilitate the request of teams in the creation process? And a couple options. You can just do the self-service, where all employees can use the Microsoft Teams application and create a team. Or a selection of people can do it. So not everybody, but just a couple of people once you assigned. Or you'll do it more in a controlled manner through like a provisioning solution, where maybe you have to fill in a form. The form is sent to a person depending on the team you're requesting, and then it's created. It's not really a right or wrong. It really depends on your requirements or your customer's requirements. And these are basically impacted by a couple things. The usage of collaboration formats. So let's say you only use Teams for one thing. You don't really, that's it. You don't really have to go for provisioning. And especially these days, there's something called Teams templates, where you can create your own templates in Teams. And that can not prevent you from using provisioning, but maybe that because of that, you don't have to use provisioning. But if you are going to have collaboration formats, templates with unique naming policies, it will become very difficult to go for self-service. Same with external access policies, they're very strict. And if you have very strict and different expiration policies, that will often lead to the need to implement a provisioning solution. And to be honest, provisioning is used for at least 90 to 95% of our customers still. Once you've done that, there's still some overall settings you have to look into, and there's still some policies. So you have messaging policies, policies if who are able to create private channels, everybody or just a selection of people. messaging policy, so that varies from using Giphies to like people being able to delete their own messages. How you're going to use apps. So are the Microsoft apps allowed? Are third-party apps allowed? Are you allowing your own apps to be uploaded? And some other settings like who can use tagging and the third-party file storage. You basically have to go to that Teams admin center and check all the settings that impact your rollout and usage of Teams the way you want to use it. Once you've done that, you need to get an agreement on all these topics I just discussed. I said it's not going to be easy. It's a lot, but if you do this properly the first time, it will save you a lot of time and frustration down the line. We still add these in a document, but you can do this in a presentation. But as long as you add the decisions into something like a central piece of document or whatever, so you can refer to it. I always present it like, hey, this is what we discussed, and this is what it finally is. Finalize it. You always get some questions, some review, rework, whatever. Finalize it. Once you've done that, then you need to implement it. Right, maybe you need to implement your provisioning solution, maybe some Microsoft Teams settings, and the governance solution. I said provisioning, but it can also be if you go for a self-service scenario. You can also look into solutions like SharePoint, Apricot that help you managing teams when you go more for a self-service scenario where people don't have to use a provisioning solution. But again, take a look at your requirements and then take a look what's available in the market. That's it. So that I know it's a lot, and I haven't even discussed all those other topics I skipped at the beginning. So if you have any more questions, you can always send me an email. You can contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can visit my blog. So don't be shy. I'll try to help you where possible, and I hope this was useful for you. So thanks for watching my session, and hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.